All right, so I'm gonna be reacting to Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists. Hope you haven't seen it yet. Grab something to eat and this is gonna be good. This is gonna be good.
You're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
Don't be a smartass.
Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him. Hello there.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Jordan
This gonna be
Peterson.
good.
I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists. My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
I would agree.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
So this claim here
So I think he's not best suited for this type of format, where you have a bunch of students running to a chair and then you try to squeeze out a 4-minute conversation until you get voted out. I don't think actually, even though I'm probably going to agree with Jordan Peterson, I don't think he's going to do too well in this format. But let's see.
that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics. Like, I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So
And
there's
so-
always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first
I
place?
don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
Then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
I think what he's saying is that you might be a priest, but from a theist perspective, the ultimate goal is reconnection with the divine, God, harmony, love, unity. And so if you left the church, that means because you haven't found what you were looking for. Because finding God isn't necessarily just in a church or just in doing Christian things or things that are looked at as Christian by the world, but actually getting to God. And this might lead you away from religion for a while or forever. Traditional mainstream religion.
well, it's obviously a generic claim.
Because there's a big difference between saying the words and living for God. And some people actually live more for God that don't proclaim the quote unquote magic words that make you Christian. But I'm sure they're going to get into that.
Understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
Well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheists claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but my experience with atheists is twofold, is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to
Exactly
speak,
what
and
I'm
that's
saying.
left them with an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like 3 people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like...
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other. The mere fact of communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God.
He is doing the same thing he did in the Elon Musk interview. If you haven't seen that, he just sometimes randomly starts talking about, so, in the Bible, in the story of Moses, and the other person is like, okay, where the hell are you even getting with this? He's gonna get to something, it is a deep and profound point he's making, but you can see it in the atheist's face, like,
Moses,
like, what the hell is going on right now?
an example, for example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible interpretation.
It's the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Not obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim is that he's good.
Yeah, see here we see here the same. We see something happening, which is Jordan Peterson wants to use a biblical story to draw a point, to make something clear, and the guy's just like, well, we don't know what the Bible says. How do we know the Bible is true? There's different interpretations without even having properly listened to what he was gonna say. Because yeah, it's you can also see it in his reaction. It's like, oh, come on now.
When we look at the Bible can't says
that Moses in the Old
He
Testament
almost laughs internally because it's just comical, but it doesn't get you anywhere. It's not. It doesn't lead to a productive discussion. It's just at that point you're just playing games.
Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant. Because the alternative claim is that he's good.
Know, because we can't talk to those authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could.
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so
yeah, that's what he tried to do earlier, and then the guy said, "Oh, but we don't know if the Bible is true. There's different interpretations."
God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the. I said
It's okay, man.
That is possible.
It's okay.
Yes.
Okay, so despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that, in its essence, is unknowable and overwhelming, and that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable.
It's the same thing for a believer, though. Like if God is quote unquote unknowable, which even from a perspective of a believer, that's the reason I believe, because I don't know God to the fullest extent. So in some way, you could also say Christians follow a God they don't understand. But it would more accurately be Christians follow a God they don't fully understand, and atheists reject a God they don't understand. Because if you to the degree that you do understand God is to the degree that you will genuinely follow Him. That's like, I know this is like opinion to a lot of people, but this is objective truth. Unity and harmony with God is the ultimate end goal. And the better you get to know God, the more you'll want to follow Him. It's only people who don't know God that don't want to follow Him.
Story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh is a
He does famously say that a lot.
mean by God. And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define
The fact that God in the Old Testament is some type of storm god is interpretation, buddy. I mean, I know this theory, but that's like, oh, we weren't doing interpretations.
for the Old Testament, does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. To help especially the audience kind of like boil this down, there was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
Central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No,
Is that?
I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side.
We are, in that sense, all religious, because to follow God doesn't necessarily mean you have to be the most religious. The most religious person isn't the best follower of God, it's just the most religious person. Now, there's a, they do coincide, they do go hand in hand. There's no doubt about that, but it's not the direct measure. This is always what these debates boil down to. The atheist is coming from a side of, well, if I don't say the right words or I don't proclaim to be in the sect or cult or whatever they want to call it of Christianity, then I guess I don't follow God, even though I might be even a better person. And the thing is that Jordan Peterson is trying to show them a bigger picture or a bigger reason why they follow God, even though, or why they follow things of God, while at the same time claim to reject them, even though they're not of the Christian faith. Because it goes deeper than just uttering some words, you know?
Side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, find one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a
Okay,
problem
let's
with
pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by
Awesome.
the majority.
I know this guy.
Hey, how's it going?
How
Nice to meet you.
doing? Nice to meet you, too.
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting it.
Do
No
you
more
be-
than I'm
do
rejecting
you believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know anything
Do you
about.
believe in Lono?
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity
that.
that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the...
What he's trying to get at is, if you can't reject Lono because you don't know Lono, so I can't reject God, and you can't claim that I don't know God. The problem here is that you say you reject God while actually acting in a certain way which doesn't reject God, and believing and saying and living a certain way which does not reject God. So it's what Jordan Peterson's claim is really trying to illustrate is what you say doesn't necessarily align with how you act and conduct yourself in the world. And he's saying, well, How can you reject something you don't know? You can't, and thereby I know the God that I'm rejecting.
Existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition
Exactly.
that undergirds your argument. And unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point.
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't
Do
mean
you
it's
believe-
formulated accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists?
He's not
yes
getting
or no?
it.
I'm not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your
Answer that
argument
question.
to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your
I
claim.
didn't say that I rejected the belief in
That's
Lono.
his implication.
I said
it's
I didn't
Lono.
know who Lono was. I didn't
Right.
say anything about
Who is
rejection.
Lono?
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't, but let me get to my even greater point. You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion. I have a degree in religious studies, specialty in Christianity and Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
Okay, you can.
They're concerned with deep matters, and one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definitional.
Right, but they also have to identify with a religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along
Well,
with
that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious but accept that they're spiritual.
Let's pause there.
It's the same thing, you know. You can't directly equate being religious with following God to a T. There's a correlation, but they're not one and the same. So just because you study religion or you know religion doesn't mean you know God, doesn't mean you understand the Bible. Just because you know some passages from the Bible doesn't mean you understand the Bible. That's the very thing. It is a quote unquote spiritual thing. And once again, a lot of people claim to be spiritual, but that means they're following other things. But that's where this whole thing breaks down fundamentally, because they are arguing against Christianity, and Peterson is trying to be like, well, but it goes deeper than that. It's what is the Bible actually implying? What does that implication mean? How does that apply to your life, whether you follow Christianity or not? Does it hold truth? Are you following the principles? Do you embody these principles? And to the degree you do, you actually do follow God. You actually are quote unquote religious or a believer or upward striving or following your conscience or
You've been voted out by the majority.
they voted his ass out. See ya.
Aha! Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how
What's
are you?
your name?
I'm Greg. Nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, But I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you
like,
think that there's an underlying unity of things?
could you explain that question?
Exactly the very same thing we were talking about earlier. An atheist looks at God from a materialist perspective. So he's talking about this being that's out there that is omnipotent and omniscient, and they imagine some type of being there or solely the personification. And he's like, well, it goes deeper than that. You're rejecting an arbitrary personification or materialistic expression of something that is beyond space, time, and matter. How can we even like? It seems like a reductionist view of God, in my opinion.
Underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or that
know
there are
that people-
multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
Either there's a truth or there isn't.
I think that I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God
Yeah.
that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I
The atheist understands, well, I'm using my logic and reasoning, but weren't we talking about something? And Jordan Peterson is trying to imply, well, but it's your conscience that guides you in your life, and he's trying to make that connection to God again. Two different worlds colliding, man. So to him, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. To Jordan Peterson, this is infinitely meaningful, what he just said, or the implication of what he just said, or the implication of him following his conscience to a degree or another.
the question.
Because it is infinitely meaningful. It's not like throwing spaghetti at a wall. But if you have a materialist view, it's like, why are you questioning how I think what is true? I'm using my logic. I'm using my reasoning. Two
Can we
worldviews.
go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No,
No,
he just doesn't get it.
I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked
All
you a
right.
very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning.
Exactly. To a T.
Sensory information.
To a T what I said.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could imagine
Infer, right? I can infer. I can.
from what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting it.
He's trying to establish the principles which make something to be quote unquote truth or higher than non-truth. And then he's gonna ask you, well, what are these principles? Because these principles allude to something.
The fact that your conscience guides you. Is that
Okay.
reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Once again, conscience is the agent which makes you interpret these quote unquote laws that we have also in morality so that you can then proceed to go to a higher revelation of truth.
Reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten.
Basically, what he's saying, created by evolution because it's useful.
Guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway. There's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten. But then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason.
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah. Like,
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament
There he
as the
goes
voice
again.
of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition
God is
of
conscience.
God, I guess, see, this is kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm
where,
not defining it.
Not
Elijah
wrong.
okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined
it.
it that
as,
way.
as I'm sure you know many people who've defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing out to you
Got
how
it.
God is defined in the Old
Okay.
Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of
Then
opening
how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, again, it goes back to my example of the
I'm
Mona
defining
Lisa.
God as conscience.
Okay. So that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning.
I mean, not from a biblical point of view. He just broadened your horizon to what following God actually means, and that's why you can no longer say you reject God, because you do actually follow your conscience, even if only 1%. So therefore, you do not. You just proved this point. Atheists reject God, but they don't understand Him. Precisely.
Of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament,
Okay,
in
so-
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever. So
It's
some.
not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay.
major
All right.
Old Testament
All right.
prophets,
All
right?
right.
He's equal in stature to
Can-
Moses.
okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant.
Because you don't understand God. That's why it's not relevant to you. Because you don't understand God. That's why you reject Him. And He's trying to show you, no, listen, you actually don't reject God. And when He's telling you about conscience and why you reject God, you're like, yeah, but that's not relevant to the context of, yes, that's the whole thing.
Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right, but
understand what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being-
accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of
I
God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous
In what way?
because again,
I asked you if you believe
hey,
that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
and then
in the
you're-
least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you
But
hypothetically disbelieve in.
it's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking.
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend
Which
to use
point?
these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of
point.
God.
You did.
I
I made a
I
specific
characterized
point
it,
that God
right.
was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at
You're gonna
all.
get
I'm
voted out,
advancing,
too.
sir. You are
Oh
retreating.
no, time's running out.
All right. Well, it was very nice to
Yes,
meet you.
nice to
That's
meet
just
you.
two
Yeah,
worldviews
it's very
colliding,
brave
man.
of you to do this.
That's just two worldviews colliding.
My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Okay.
What is up, Mr.
Like the
Canada?
shirt.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever. Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals and older individuals found in a tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth, still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right? But we know that members of his tribe were taking care of him, right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, We actually developed altruism. We have examples of chimpanzees who actually have a basic understanding of fairness, right? If you give a chimpanzee 2 grapes, right, and his buddy gets 3, right? He actually freaks out, right? But you give both chimps 3 grapes and they're good. We have examples of parrots.
Except for the greedy chimps.
Except for the greedy chimps.
They want 4 grapes.
They want 4 grapes. You know, those do exist, right? But we have similar examples where we do animal tests, right? And
So morality is intrinsic.
I think
So it precedes science.
I think that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right,
Yeah.
require some level of morality or
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require
Going to be the difference. Those, and then he's going to say, well, morality is useful and because of evolution. And Jordan Peterson is going to say, no, morality comes first. It is an essential part of being in of itself because we're created by a moral God. And we're made in the image, so to speak.
morality or
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
how's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just
It
indicated
doesn't need
by
to derive
pointing
from the
to.
scientific process.
Well,
It's
hang
the
on,
fact that
hang on a sec.
we are social animals and we need that to exist as a group.
I
right?
agree, but
Sure.
you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals, to the morality of chimpanzees. They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how
That's
that works.
my point.
Science explains it. So
No, science doesn't explain morality.
it doesn't explain how social animals would need to be.
Well, that's
altruistic.
a complicated question.
Is it? But we see it though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Okay, so you're asking why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're
I'm-
social animals and we
Yeah,
need
but there's
to be.
more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique, and that structures our morality.
No, actually, there are other animals that can predict the future, or
Not
not predict
really.
the future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed
This is just comical. Oh, but you know, tigers, they can see in the future because this activity. Like, what is it proving? I don't understand.
somebody. And so
Hunting
actually,
animals. Look,
no. Kids threw shit at the tiger. The tiger.
He's trying to like what the atheist is trying to do right now is like, look, oh, but you're wrong. You're wrong. There are animals who can see in the future. What you said is wrong. Therefore, I win. But it's like that's not the point of it. He's trying to show you something, you know.
Tiger actually plotted its escape, and it found the
One of them has a spiritual agenda. The other one just a rational, logical one of wanting to be right or no worldviews, man.
threw shit at the tiger. The tiger actually plotted its escape, and it found the
I'm not
kids.
saying that animals can't think.
Okay.
No,
let's
but they can
pause here.
perceive the future. That's what I'm saying.
Well-
Voted out by the majority.
And Joe Peterson is like, well, yeah, but that's not what I'm trying to get at, you know.
Good man. Yeah.
Hey, Jordan Peterson. How you
How
doing?
you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori.
Okay.
Right? That's why we define science as value-free. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
Okay.
And that act of prioritization of attention is a value-predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume
Yeah.
about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
People debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand that. And me, myself, I am a former young earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality, evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery's wrong, I think
No,
it
it
should
says
say
that
that.
in the story of Moses.
Yeah.
It says slavery is incorrect.
That's the very
It says
Well,
it's
origin.
that's
immoral.
why Moses leads his people
Yeah, exactly. What?
away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't that
Well,
immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God.
Wouldn't you
And so
say that-
slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the
Yes.
UK, who then convinced the
Yes.
UK government for 200 years to go to war on
And
slavery.
wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general rather than just
No,
Christianity?
I think it's the
'Cause-
flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution
And what do you
of
mean
morality.
by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well,
yeah.
based on culture and history, right? We get better.
Well, they
and-
did do it based on culture and history, but
Yes.
culture and history have their foundations too. So
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the
everyone,
Bible. Based on the
that's-
Bible, they
that's
looked
much
at it and
less
they
true.
justified it in the United States and the Deep South. They justified slavery
Yeah, but the
based
main
on the
thrust-
Bible.
Just because somebody justifies slavery and they use the Bible doesn't mean it's true. Just because I follow Muhammad and I say I use the Bible as a justification doesn't mean it's true. Like, if you read the first 4 chapters of the Old Testament, the very thing which gets the people of God going is the fact that God brings them out of slavery as a motivator, as a showcase of what is truthful and good. The Bible doesn't teach you need to have slaves, but it sets certain ways of dealing with certain situations. And back in those days, people were a little different, a little more carnal, right? You had Moses going to another city, and the first thing they did was they wanted to gang rape him, and he was staying at a house, and the guy had 2 daughters, I think. They were both 18 and virgins. And then the first thing these people did from that city was they surrounded the house and they wanted to break in and gang rape them. And then they decided to send the 2 young girls outside so that they can rape the girls instead of them. And it wasn't enough. They wanted to rape Moses, and Moses was like an old man at that point. Just to like, you need some. Just because the Bible teaches you how you would deal in difficult situations or how you would deal in war doesn't necessarily mean it condones that. And also, you have to differentiate between Old Testament and New Testament, right? There are things that were allowed in a different time that are not allowed anymore because that's the implication, or the quote unquote Christian argument is that we're growing as people, we're growing as beings, and so we're held to higher moral standards. This is also what Christ says when he says, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. I didn't come to say this is now bad and this is good. I came to give you the next step, a higher form of morality. For example, sacrifice. We no longer sacrifice on altars because we've grown spiritually. We now sacrifice with work, with devotion, with other things. It's the same principle.
That's
Looked at
much
it
less
and they
true.
justified it in the United States and the Deep South. They justified slavery.
Yeah, but
based on the Bible.
the main thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently
Yes,
against slavery,
which-
and it was about the only movement in the history
Yes.
of the human race that
Yes.
had an anti-slavery
which,
direction.
which was driven by humans and their
Well,
understanding
that's one
of
way of
morality.
looking at it. Well, it depends.
Oh, but now, okay, so if we have slavery, it's because of the Bible, and if we stop slavery, it's because of humans, right?
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly. They
Precisely.
So there's no argument there. If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
evolving morality based on the culture that within the society that they live in.
Okay,
So
fine.
with
I think
women's
that did
suffrage as
happen.
well is a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity, such as Pentecostal movement, which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most
don't.
like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the
that's
idea of God.
Fine, but what's your
Yes.
point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans,
Yes.
regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power.
Even
it's
he
driven
is
on our
laughing.
experiences
Define
as
higher.
humans, which is what is best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscious is also something that has evolved over time. And I think that's
What's
something
the
that does evolve in morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, this is moral because God says so, just like women's suffrage.
There's lots
and
of
just like homosexuality.
So if we go through the Bible and I can show you that God didn't actually influence or say you have to to commit slavery, but that slavery isn't good and the very thing which caused the story to begin, are you going to say God says slavery is bad? Because his argument is God says slavery is good. That's why I reject God. But then if I can show you from the biblical scriptures that this is not the case, that you're just misinformed and taking two verses out of the Old Testament out of context because you want to reject the whole book, because you have bad experiences with religion. Like, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's just stupid arguments.
Human societies were slave owning, so you
Yes.
can't blame that on the Bible.
If humanity decided...
Oh, wait, address that first.
What, about
All
slavery?
human societies were slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
Well, you can say it bolstered it.
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
Based
in
on
the
their
UK.
interpretation of the Bible,
It was the Protestant Christians.
which evolves over time.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
All right. Well, it was great talking
Yeah,
with you,
nice
sir.
talking to you, too.
Yes.
What's he drinking there? Soju? Little alcohol?
Dr. Peterson?
Good to see you, man.
Oh, man,
What's your
Ronnie.
name?
Brian. So the first thing I would like to say is I would like to engage in this discussion in a symbiotic manner. I would not like to engage where there is one clear winner and one clear loser. Emotions are activated and it ultimately comes about ego. So I'm just saying I'm really trying to understand your position, and I would just like you to really try to understand my position.
Deal.
Okay, sounds good. With that, if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, because I would say by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a
Okay.
definition, right?
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian tradition, the
Reconnect.
purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell.
Method and goal.
Yes, that's
Okay.
a good way of thinking about
What
it.
is the purpose of heaven? Do you understand?
Well,
so here's the deal.
At
We
minimum,
can
at
get
minimum,
into
it's
an
the opposite
infinite.
of endless suffering. How about
We
that?
can, okay, and so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? And if we can achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth
mean
without
avoid it-
God,
you mean avoid
avoiding it,
infinite,
if we can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim?
Well, yeah, except that it doesn't, you circumvented my initial definition because I said that by definition, God was the unified source of morality. And so if we engage in a moral exercise.
And when you're talking about morality, though, when you really reverse engineer it and you get it down to its root, you're a psychologist.
yeah.
It really seems like it just has to deal with motivation. People are saying there is a God, there
It's
is a
more specific than that.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if there is a God and there is a moral code and it doesn't come at your benefit, are you going to follow it?
It depends on how you define your benefit. If you define your benefit,
if it's going to come at your expense, would you still
Define
follow
your
it?
expense.
If God came down and said, here is my moral code and you should follow it, but even if you follow it, you are still going to end up in hell, are you going to follow it?
well, that was the question that was put to Job and to Christ, right? Because they
okay,
were
but-
required.
but
Hang on, I'm answering
asking-
your
I'm
question. They were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with
Yeah.
the motivation of believing that this omnipotent, all-loving God would somehow turn it into a benefit. So they still did it solely for their benefit.
That's so degrading. Your faith in the essential goodness of being is not something you cling to because you're so weak. There's a tremendous amount of virtue in striving upwards, even if everything goes to shit. to just be like, oh, he's just a little brainwashed because he believed he's gonna go to heaven. It's like such a, I don't know. I don't like that.
How turn it into a benefit. So they still did it solely for their benefit. So
No,
when you,
not well.
yes,
Let's
they
define.
did. Yes, they
Hang on,
did.
hang on.
Ultimately, he's saying, oh, you just want good. You're just an ego. You also see it in his reaction right here. He's saying, oh, you're just like me. You just want what's best for you, and that's why you do it. You're no different to me. There's no such thing as morality. You just want the heaven. But why do you want to have? What is like?
It solely for their benefit. So
No,
when you,
not well.
yes,
Let's
they
define.
did. Yes,
You follow God solely for your benefit. Is that
Hang on,
did.
hang on.
If-
Let's
if-
define benefit. Like, if I did something for your sister, would that be to your benefit? Like, how are you defining your benefit? Do you mean one of your whims gratified now? Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time?
Because to follow God in a lot of ways is doing the exact opposite of what you want to do. That's the very thing. That's the very, what is the core of Christianity? Christ, self-sacrificing. You resist temptation. You resist that which everybody wants to do, in the hopes and in the faith that it will produce better fruits. That's not some weak thing you cling to because you just want what's good. That's such a disingenuous view, or just straight up naive view.
Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time? Like,
So
what do you mean by
when,
you?
when you're talking about whims, I think you're talking about something that's more dopamine. When you're talking about morality, you're talking about something that's more serotonin and more ultimately satisfying. So you and I agree on a lot. I mean, when it comes to talking about how men should be masculine and things of that nature, you and I are 100% in agreement. We just don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that provides morality.
It's not a justification, it's a definition.
What's the difference then between a definition and a justification? I mean, it's ultimately
No, I see.
psychologically the same thing.
Well, we have to define what we're talking about before we can debate.
Okay, well,
right?
so
And
here's my
I
position.
said that God, among other things.
I'm actually a non-theist. I'm not an atheist. I believe the human condition is one of uncertainty. And what that means is that I don't believe that you can conclude there is a God with certainty, and I don't believe that you can conclude that there is a God without in the same position.
Sure, but you have hints, and you can use these hints to weigh which one is more likely. It also feels like he's not really coming in here to listen. He just set this whole shtick in the beginning because he wants to be listened to, but it doesn't seem like he's willing to listen himself.
Now, with that, I don't care. I still wake up every day and I have motivation to be a moral person.
Define
Exactly, because you don't know what you're rejecting.
moral.
Moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you
And
come
what
to that
I ought
conclusion?
to do, ultimately, it comes down to
Conscience.
what not just benefits me, but what benefits the entire planet, what
Exactly.
benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective comes from linear thinking. And when you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved moved or an uncaused cause, he was defining God from a linear perspective. And you do the same with morality, and you do the same with purpose.
How does my
I
definition
reject
of
that.
morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself, and nothing in the universe exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists in and of itself. It's a whole systems-based morality. It's a systems-based reality.
Is there a
and
hierarchical
that is
structure?
what the quantum.
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some
So what he's saying is creation is all interlinked. Creation is all the same. Nothing exists in a vacuum, so how could God exist in a vacuum? How could there be something separate if everything that is not like that which you claim to believe in? It doesn't make sense. Now, Jordan Peterson said, is there a hierarchy?
things more important than others?
Are some things, I think some things lead to more benefits than
Then,
others.
by your own
And so what that means, though, the moment you make that admission, you say that there's a hierarchy. So there has to be something at the pinnacle.
definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
What is
pause there. You've been voted out
Pinnacle.
by the majority.
What is on top? Because you can do this from a materialistic point of view. You can look at all of creation and then apply this to God and say, how could God exist? God doesn't align with the way creation in of itself is manifested. But then you still have the question, well, if there's a hierarchy, what's on top of the creation, that which you care most about in the creation, and that becomes your God in a sense. So it's still yeah.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to
I
meet you.
know
I
this
guess
guy.
since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science,
He's a
it
snake.
would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an
How
all-knowing.
about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He's a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
Just ignores him.
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say you
circular?
believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a belief?
believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to.
Once again, the same thing. You have logic coinciding with spirit. One wants to actually broaden the other's horizon, while the other just wants to win an argument. Yes, if somebody holds a gun to your head and says, deny the existence of this pen, you're going to be like, okay, I don't believe in the pen, but you still believe in the pen. Are you willing to live in a world where everybody pretends like that pen doesn't exist? That's the real question, because that's also Jordan Peterson has studied totalitarianism. That's how you get into totalitarianism. Are you actually willing to live in a world where everybody pretends like that pen isn't there with full conviction and nobody speaks? That's what he's saying. He's not saying, once again, you have the same thing as with the first guy. It's like, oh, I can logically prove you're wrong because look, I believe this pen to be real, but I wouldn't die for it. Therefore, your statement is wrong. But you don't understand what it means to believe. Like an arbitrary claim to evade short-term consequences of being shot in the skull because somebody said deny this pen or you're gonna die is not the same as being willing to live in a reality and never speaking up where people deny the fundamental basis of reality.
Be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't be
life?
so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
Once again, he has a whole library and knowledge of what brings you into totalitarianism and then what brings you into self-destruction as a human race and as an individual if you deny that which you know to be true and nobody speaks up. And he's like serious because this is a deep topic, and the other guy's like, well, wouldn't you deny the pen's existence if somebody held a gun to your head? Like, yeah, college kids, man.
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to protect them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis? If
I
they're
would have
asking?
done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation
you
to
lie?
begin with. It's a hypothetical, and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you
don't
eat today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just
Yes,
asking if
you
you ate
are.
it today.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical?
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because you
I
don't
did
like, are you like
clarify.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask you.
It's just a basic hypothetical where you put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany. That's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously, you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist?
Yeah, this is disgusting, but I think it would have been easier in this situation if, in all fairness, if Jordan Peterson just said, "Yeah, obviously I would lie," because obviously he would, and obviously he already knows that he would, and the reason is because you're going to say then, "Oh, but the Bible says you shouldn't lie. You shouldn't lie." But in that situation, you do lie. So does that mean God is wrong when he says you shouldn't lie? How does that work? Because he uses his, once again, he has a conscience, he has a spirit, which tells him in that situation it's the right thing to do, which is to lie, because he has a hierarchy of morality because he's made in the image of God. And so he's saying, yeah, but she would lie, which goes against the dogmatic rule set. But the problem is that you do the right thing by lying in that situation. So when you have the spirit of truth, you can forego arbitrary rules in certain instances. So yes, you shouldn't lie. This is a general rule that our society is predicated on. But that doesn't mean you always have to say the truth or the true thing, because truth is not necessarily the true thing. So if my girlfriend comes and she says, I really love this dress, do I look good in it? And I feel like it doesn't really suit her, I might just say, yeah, you look good in it, because I want to preserve the relationship. It's more worthy than trying to point out the thing which is materialistically true, because we both know the truth is to protect these Jews from the Nazis. That's the truth. But it is also the truth that they're there in the back room. And if I'm not saying they're in the back room, I'm telling a lie. Because truth goes deeper than the mere physical manifestation of your surroundings. So just because something is there physically doesn't mean that's the echelon of truth, but as a rational materialist, that's your only conception of truth, because you're purely looking at everything through a materialistic lens. So what he's saying is, oh, but you would deny the Jews in your house, so therefore you are a liar. Therefore it's not true. The dogmatic rule said that you shouldn't tell a lie. But it's like, it's such a weak and baseless argument, because we see the same thing. Christ did the same thing. He healed somebody on the Sabbath. What did the religious hypocrites do? Because he's taking the role of the religious hypocrite here. It's like, well, you shouldn't work on the Sabbath. And Christ was trying to give him the spirit. Look, there's higher things than mere dogmatic rule sets. So, in that sense, once again, these atheists are often arguing against the quote unquote naive religious hypocrites who stick to dogmatic rule sets, failing to understand the underlying truth of what these stories and texts actually teach us. So it's such a weak argument. It's just such a limited materialistic logical view. It's like, oh, I got you there. Like, how you would lie to save somebody else's life. It's like, okay, man, what are you really proving? Like, it's just so weak.
Like, so you're
Why
anti-fascist?
are you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying.
It's like you are anti-fag. Come on now.
Okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly
I told you he was a snake. I know this guy.
Asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's life.
answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's
manner
not what
you
truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with Christianity.
I can imagine that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you like lied in that scenario. So
not
clearly
without
that's not
the
what you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it. You were not willing to let other people.
I don't get why he can't just say, yeah, I do, because truth is deeper than what's,
will die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How's
corner.
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Great conversation.
He could have articulated it better, Jordan Peterson could have articulated that better, but that's easy for me to say, being in the home, in the comfort of my home, and not being bombarded with 20, or at least one disingenuous, rational thinker. Purely rational.
My next claim
Which is
is
almost
that
irrational.
everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
100% agree. We all do.
Hi.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with like defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the other.
It's a hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you call it top or bottom, I
Yeah,
suppose.
right.
At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth.
Well, just because you have a different God doesn't mean your God is true.
It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right, but at the
Or
bottom is
top.
God, and there
That's
are
a definition, yeah.
Yeah, so at the bottom is God,
Yeah.
and there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
They're each valid from a subjective point of view. If you do actually believe in a hierarchy and in actual instances where something is right and something is wrong, then not everybody can be in truth at the same time if they all claim different things are the truth. Because if you can recognize a hierarchy, if you can recognize some things are higher than others, for example, lying to preserve the Jews, then what you're alluding to the fact that there is a hierarchy, which means something has to be at the pinnacle. So if everybody's pinnacle is different, we cannot all be worshiping the same God, which means we are probably not all in truth at the same time because we have different pinnacles. Because if we can all establish that there is such a thing as a hierarchy, then that means the pinnacle must be the same. And if we all arrive at different pinnacles, then we're not in the same hierarchy. Then our views of hierarchy is like meaningless. But we can clear as they say that it will be better to lie to save the Jews than to not save the Jews. So there's a hierarchy. The hierarchy is true. This is a foundational claim. Once you recognize that, you have to recognize that there is an objective truth. And if there is such a thing as objective truth, not everybody can be right if they worship or claim something else to be God.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying
So they're not all equal. Like all foundational principles are not
Worship
equal,
the wrong thing.
even though
Right.
they might be equally foundational. Right.
So what makes one kind of foundational tenet like better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid, and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So
Well, then
repetition.
it's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game, right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now, it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So we're explaining like characteristics that can be applied to like these types of like foundational values. But why is it that this iterability makes it better, and what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily. So
Right.
it's invitational.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in
If you worship the wrong thing, you're gonna go to hell, metaphorically or literally, such as if you indulge in drugs and you live for the now, you worship the wrong thing, you worship your immediate self, which leads you to a bad road for yourself and for others. And that's one of the ways we can determine if that which you worship is actually the truth, if it actually produces fruits, because the ultimate goal within every man is heaven. Even if you're an atheist, you want what's good, right? That's the whole motivation. You want to avoid hell. The pain screams for you to change. That's also why we're on earth, because we fell and now we have pain, and this should motivate us to reconnect with the divine.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in some type of system with a goal, an output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
harmony.
Harmony,
Yeah,
right?
that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Exactly. So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it, and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Oh yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right,
Okay,
so we're talking about within a system. When we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral, it means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like, stance independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exists as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how...
There's an element of that that's true. So for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan. And so Job is emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you mean independent of people?
Independent of people, we can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific, something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay. I completely agree. So,
I think good is the goal. And to the degree that you have good is to the degree you are harmonious, or what they're really talking about is heaven. Because she says happiness, he says harmony. Heaven, that's just another word for it. So to the degree that you live out that which is good, you will have that which is good. The kingdom of heaven is within.
in a sense, this is why...
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
So it's in reference to a goal.
So,
or the goal would be the imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be
it's very profound.
Something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be in congruence.
Oh, right, okay.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes like that's what I'm trying to figure out, because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill.
Yes. At the top of the things you desire is to imitate Christ and to do what you perceive to be true and right, even if it comes at the detriment of your whole life. I think that's a Christian. And that's not somebody who's weak and just clinging to delusions because he wants to feel good. No, that's a heavy burden. That's moral virtue right there. Although Christ says, my burden is light. Why? Because when you walk in truth, your walk is better. Because once again, the more you act out that which is good, the closer you get to harmony, the closer you get to heaven. The kingdom of heaven is within.
Regardless of circumstances, to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
That's important, regardless of circumstance. That's a true pinnacle of a hierarchy.
Okay, so someone can have a God, because in your definition, your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they
I
just...
know, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And
Precisely.
the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has...
Faith without works is dead.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins or that...
I know what he's going to say. Well, what does it mean to believe? Watch.
That God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that like acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the true
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example. So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society on that, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right, now the contrary to that would be something like you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right.
So is that person Christian?
That is precisely because we're made in the image. Spirit.
Moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right. So is that person Christian, though? Is that person Christian?
To some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern, right? So you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things, and you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
This is a deep problem, even, you could say, because there are a lot of people who say, oh, I'm Christian, but truly nobody is a Christian, because we all fall short of the glory of God. We all fail to imitate Christ. And just because somebody says, oh, I wish to imitate Christ, doesn't mean they actually do. This might just mean they're just in a religious sect and they're just naive. And so they just think, oh, if I just say the right words, I'm going to get what's good for me, while I can ignore all my duties and responsibilities here on earth. Like, just because somebody says something doesn't mean a lot. And this is what actually deters a lot of people from the original or core truth of Christ, is mainstream religion and mainstream religious people who are just people after all, and people are stupid.
Right. So then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like that.
Christian. Well, but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am
no one
Christian,
really
not
can.
8/12, but Christian.
Well, I hesitate to do that personally, because I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same. Right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing, and you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see
Why in boxes?
like when I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can.
I think what she's trying to get to is that you can be good without being a Christian. But here's the thing, if Christ is who he says he is, then the closer you get to that perceived goodness that you're talking about, then the more you would recognize who Christ actually is. Because they're one. The spirit that within you, your conscience, is one with Christ according to Christ. They're one and the same. So the closer you would get to that perceived goodness outside of Christianity, the closer you would get to actually realizing, wait, Christ is truly the best we could be and the highest we should achieve to be as people. But yes, you can have a person outside of Christianity born before that or in a place where Christianity doesn't exist. You still have an inner conscience and inner guidance. You still have the voice of God guiding you, and you'll be judged according to what you knew.
Necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we.
Exactly, because your faith is truly only ever tested if you have to give up pleasures and suffer in the now for the sake of truth. If it's always easy, it's like we don't really know if what you say is true. But there, okay, oh, you choose that which is less fun in the moment. Okay, now we can see, okay, you do actually have some belief.
Came to though is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that way.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Good debate.
Thank you so much.
Really,
That was good.
very thoughtful.
That was good.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
It's the guy we saw in the beginning.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well,
Is he gonna make another logical? Oh, is he gonna make another logical comparison once again to be like, ha, gotcha.
I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Yes.
Okay.
So Catholics worship Mary. It's so stupid. It's so stupid.
So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest.
But you
place.
would.
Obviously, he's loving that because he's an atheist who thinks purely in logic, and so he's like, "Oh, did you just prove that Christians worship Mary? That you're a bunch of heretics and hypocrites." But Mary is not the pinnacle, right? And that's why you don't worship Mary. She's not what's on top, but she might be more important than other things.
Put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back.
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy,
Exactly.
but within the
There's something at the top.
Exactly.
All right,
And that
you
is
can
not
worship
Mary.
things
Mary is
below.
quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your
Why it's such a naive way? Give me a definition, and then I'll find another logical thing, and then I can prove you wrong. Like, I prioritize putting on my underwear after I come out the shower. Does that mean I worship my underwear? No, but it means I prioritize wearing underwear or not being naked when I walk through the house next to my roommates over not doing it. But there are things that I care more about. And if we extrapolate and we look at the whole hierarchy, that which is on top is what I worship. It doesn't mean just because I momentarily attend to my fucking underwear or I prioritize putting on my underwear over being on my knees and worshiping Jesus at that very second, I worship my underwear. Like, it's such a stupid example.
definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to.
prioritize,
Do
and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall.
Yeah, that's what he's not getting. I prioritize my underwear when I put it on in the morning. I attend to my underwear, and in that sense, for that time being, I worship or I prioritize my underwear more than I prioritize reading the Bible because I want to wear some underwear. It's doesn't mean it's my God because it's not at the pinnacle. It's not on top. That's not hard to grasp.
Prioritize Mary over all other human beings.
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand.
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend a
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition, but your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
And he also said he could flesh it out for you. This is disingenuous, or it's just really, really limited worldview, just totally stuck up in intellect and logic and totally disconnected to. Because his agenda is I'm trying to prove you're right or wrong using logic, and Jordan Peterson's quote unquote agenda is he wants to actually show you something, or he wants to help you, he wants to elevate you, because that's the nature of somebody who follows God. He wants to help you. If I found what is truly good, I want to try and help you find what is truly good. I'm not just trying to win the debate.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism,
Why is
aren't
he
you?
so?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
How do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you
Something
asking
wrong.
me?
Like, imagine I just mute this. This the type of face you see when you're like tied to a chair and some guy's gonna fucking murder you. Look at those eyes. Scary. That's something really scary about that guy. I don't know, dude.
Why are you asking me that? Somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
How do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where
So
you
again,
are
it's,
right now.
it's a cool gotcha, and
what is this? Is
the
this
rational atheist there in the back is loving it, but it's not conducive to any goal. It doesn't like prove anybody wrong. It just shows you're a disingenuous asshole.
Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Of course, this soy boy is loving it. Sorry if I get angry here, but yeah, I need to be better.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I was invited
It's such a feminine, argumentative spirit. It's so unattractive.
to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited
Infantilized, not feminine. Excuse me.
to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
Invited to.
He's trying to think. He's trying to be genuine and honest.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
Oh, fucking hate these people.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're
Try
really
not
quite
to, though.
nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Oh, he got another gotcha. I was talking.
But
my bad.
the YouTube channel, you're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
It's a cool gotcha, and they're all gonna think, see, he won, but what did he actually win? He won nothing. He just did a cool gotcha, but ultimately, he was probably still suffering because he's refusing to grow spiritually as a person. Like even me saying, "Oh, I hate these people." Surely I should have empathy for them because they're so blinded and naive as to how they arrive at truth. Like they're gonna walk out of there and think they won the debate, that there even was a winner. That you're the winner if the people around you say, "Oh, how do you like?" Because they're just short-sighted and naive.
Hi there.
Hi, nice
What's
to meet
your
you.
name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So you've said that worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure. So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street.
Is he gonna make the same claim again? I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife. Does that mean I worship my wife? Well, if there's nothing above your wife, then yeah, in that sense, you do worship your wife. But if there's something more important to you than your wife, then you don't worship your wife. Or to some degree, the moment you attend to her, you could say you technically worship her, but it's not ultimate or true worship. The same way you can say I worship my underwear when I prioritize it over everything else in that given second. But it's not that true or fullest extent to my underwear or to my to my hierarchy, because you could say okay, would you if when you put your underwear on that morning, that would mean you would forsake Christ, then it's like, okay, I guess I'll walk through the house naked. So I still have a hierarchy. You understand? Like it's the same. Please don't make the same claim.
prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would
Arguments.
prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably, yeah.
Presumably.
Say-
Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship
Such a low-level argument. I'll shut up though. Let's watch.
worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure. So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably, yeah.
Presumably. Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So prioritize and sacrifice. I do
the
those
higher
things.
it is in the hierarchy, the more what you're doing is akin to worship. But even in your trivial acts of attention, you're prioritizing and partaking in worship, even if you don't know it.
So I am
And it's partly, well, with regard to your wife, say. So why do you value your wife? You do value your
Yes,
wife.
I love
okay.
her. So I
Right.
prioritize and I
Okay.
sacrifice for her.
Right, right. So that's within the confines of love, let's say. And
Sure.
what else does it serve?
What else does what serve?
Your love in your marriage?
I mean, I'm married to my wife because I love her. That's
Yeah.
also why I prioritize and sacrifice for her. I certainly wouldn't think I worship her, and I don't think anyone else would make that.
I'm
Are you
trying to
making
make
that
a
claim?
definition.
Okay.
Yeah, that there's a hierarchy of attentional priority, and as you move up it or down it, depending on whether you think about it as a pinnacle or a foundation, you move more towards worship. Right,
Okay.
so even the small things, I'll give you an example. Imagine you go on a date. Well, imagine that your aim is a long-term relationship like a marriage. Okay, now imagine that your aim is short-term sexual gratification. Your pattern of attention is going to vary during the date, depend on your ultimate end.
Of
That's
course.
the hierarchy. The way that you attend to your wife is dependent on your ultimate aims, even if you don't know it.
So at what point is it worship? Because it sounds like you're saying
It's
worship is almost a
shades.
spectrum, right? Or it's not a binary. It's not a.
It's kind of
quantum.
like that's a good
So
question.
when
It's
is when is it worship as opposed to just I love my wife?
the closer you get to the top or the bottom, the more it's more like
How
worship.
close to the top? Because I don't think I worship anything. And if you're saying I have to hit a certain threshold for it to be worship, it is possible I don't worship anything then, right?
Yeah, here we're getting into definitions. You should probably say that only that which is truly at the top do you truly worship, and the rest you just attend to or prioritize, but you don't necessarily worship. To me, the word worship does entail that which is at the pinnacle. So maybe it's not the best formulation to say you worship your wife, even though in some sense it's true because you prioritize her. But this is wordplay.
It's not possible that you don't worship anything.
What do I worship?
Because you wouldn't
That
attend.
which is at the top.
Well, love.
So you think I
Apparently.
worship love?
Do you attend in consequence of love?
I
See,
do.
I'm trying to define something. What
Right.
do you mean worship? I told you what I meant. What do you mean?
So I mean, something you worship is something that you have a reverential view for in a manner in which you believe it to be above and beyond normal things you like. Like you
So do you
presumably
have
worship
that
God.
attitude towards your wife?
I have that
Do you
attitude.
privilege her compared to other women?
Of course, I privilege her compared to
Okay.
other women, but I don't worship her. Nor does she worship me.
By the definition you just offered, yes, you do. Because you just offered
Yeah,
it.
but now he's doing the same thing which I talked about earlier. It's a logical gotcha, but it's not. What lacks is the formulation that it has to be at the pinnacle. That which is at the pinnacle is that which you truly worship. So, for example, you could say, if somebody robs your house and he holds a gun to your head and your wife's head, and he tells you, one of you is gonna die, choose. And you choose, okay, I want to live. Then you worship yourself, probably, unless there's something else which you're willing to die for, then that is the thing which you worship. So you should probably, I think it will be easier if we establish that that which is worship is that which is at the utmost pinnacle, whether you're aware of what that is or you aren't. Because you could think that is my wife, but once you're in a situation, you're going to find out you're actually a weak man and you're not willing to die for her. So you worship your own life more than that. And then maybe you do worship life. And then we have the biblical passage, the pride of life, right?
Definition that involved prioritization and elevation.
Well, and thinking that she is divine above and beyond what a normal natural
women.
phenomenon can be. Not other women, no, beyond any human being could ever be. I will prioritize her over
See,
any
you're
other
making
human, but I
the
don't
assumption.
think that she is some
You're making
supernatural
the
being.
assumption that only the thing at the top or the bottom has anything to do with worship. And I'm saying that's not true. It's a hierarchy of prioritization. And there's either something at the top or the bottom, depending on the metaphor, or you're fragmented and confused.
There's a difference between a momentary hierarchy and the ultimate or like or ultimate hierarchy, because in my momentary hierarchy I will prioritize putting on my underwear, but in my ultimate hierarchy I think I'll prioritize the truth and in Jesus Christ. So there's a difference there. Because I wouldn't say your momentary hierarchy necessarily correlates to worship. I wouldn't ascribe it that word worship, but once again we're getting into definition wordplay.
Those are the only options.
So let's say
You're
I'm
either going in many directions
Okay.
or you're going in one direction.
So let's suppose.
Well, that's also, I disagree with that, because I think if your goal is misplaced, I think fundamentally you either walk up or you walk down, or you're just naive and you just stumble somewhere, but you're still gonna get closer to that which is good or get further away, right? This is just how things work. You have pain and pleasure, heaven and hell. You either walk towards self-improvement and that which is good, or towards your self-destruction. To me, there's no middle ground. You can be naive, you can do quote unquote neutral things, but they will still either get you to a better place or they're not a better place. Like, for example, putting on my underwear. It's like a neutral thing, but it's upward striving. I put on my underwear because I don't want to be fucking naked when I walk through my house. So it puts me in a better position to, after that, then engage in another activity which puts me in a better position. For example, I'm not looked at as a weirdo by my community, and then I can go into my room and I can be productive and I can work on something or whatever. So in that sense, it's an upwards activity. Or I could, I don't know, smoke or not put on my underwear or whatever, in which case I'm going to go down. So even if I'm fragmented, I think the fragmentation is a hint or a testimony to the fact that I'm an idolater who worships many different idols. And depending on which situation, I'm going to pick and choose what I worship. And this is going to lead to my own self destruction because I don't have a clear foundational root or basis upon which I stand. And this is why I'm going to suffer and metaphorically and physically walk to hell.
So let's say
You're either going in many directions
Okay.
or you're going in one direction.
So let's suppose I'm fragmented and confused. Then you
Yeah.
agree I don't worship anything.
No, then you'd worship multiple things.
How? But so what's the threshold when it's worship? Right. I prioritize a lot of stuff.
Same wordplay.
That the closer you get to the pinnacle,
shouldn't be
or the
that.
How
closer
close?
you get,
Can you give
I
me?
don't like that definition because the word worship entails a lot. To me, at least, it should be that which is at the utmost pinnacle, and then the goal is to get aware of, well, what is that, and to figure that out.
Some sort of metric? How close do I got to get to this pinnacle?
do you know the difference between cheap literature and deep literature?
Yes.
Okay, that's the same issue. And how do you distinguish between them? What's the difference between cheap and deep?
I mean, it's really an opinion-based thing, right?
Is
I mean,
it? So it's just an opinion that
plenty of-
Dostoevsky is better than a porno magazine.
Well, I've spoken to people who think To Kill a Mockingbird's cheap. It's one of my favorite books. So, I mean, people will differ on
Well,
opinions.
just because people are stupid about things doesn't mean that their opinion is valid.
That's certainly
Do
true.
you,
I do
let
agree
me
with
ask
it.
you.
I agree with that.
Okay, well, do you think there is a hierarchy in literary quality?
I think that there is a hierarchy to an extent in literary quality, but I think once you get to a certain threshold, it is just opinion. Like, I agree. Dostoevsky
Okay.
is better than.
That means you attest to the fact that there is a hierarchy, which means you attest to the fact that there is something at the pinnacle. And I wouldn't say that the closer you get to the pinnacle, the more you worship it. I would say that which is at the pinnacle is that which you ultimately and truly worship.
A porno mag, but is F. Scott Fitzgerald
Why do
better
you
than
think
Ernest
that?
Hemingway? I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Why do you think that?
Because of what a book is, what literature is, Dostoevsky, he follows what literature is the purpose of more than the porno magazine
Okay,
does.
good. Well,
So it's about purpose
so
and
let me.
definitions.
Yeah, sure. Let me give you an analog then.
Okay.
The depth of worship is analogous to depth of literary significance. And the closer you get to what's deep, the more religious and worshipful your practice.
So to
and
use
maybe you
your
don't know what's at the bottom, but something needs to be, or you're confused.
Well, so to use your analogy, then how deep do I have to go for it to be worship? Do I have to be Catcher in the Rye? Do I have to be War and Peace? Or
Depends on what
is
it depends on
Twilight
what
enough?
you're seeking for.
I'm seeking to know whether I worship something. You've claimed I worship something, and I
If
want
you
to
want
know.
to have a deep and meaningful life, then you have to go all the way to the bottom or the top. And insofar as you're capable of doing that, because otherwise you'll be fragmented and miserable and anxiety-ridden and hopeless.
So I have to worship something to have a meaningful life.
That's the very definition of meaning. Find out that which you want the most in life. That's also analogous to purpose.
And if I
There's
worship
no difference between those two things.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
So if I don't worship anything, my life will not be meaningful, correct?
Well, that's the definition of nihilism.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm a nihilist, I don't worship anything.
That's
You think you don't worship anything, but you do worship things, but these things just lead to your own self-destruction.
true. And then you,
Oh, okay. You just said everybody worships something. I think you just agreed there is a class of people that doesn't.
well, they're incoherent in their worship. And hand gestures like that aren't going to help.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, if you're
Same thing. He thinks he gets a logical gotcha, but Peterson is actually trying to explain something that is objectively true if you have eyes to see.
incoherent and fragmented and aimless, which is what happens if your objects of worship are unstructured and chaotic, then you're going to be anxiety-ridden and without hope. That happens. That's a technical argument.
But there's happy nihilists.
Oh,
How do you explain that there are happy nihilists then? Because
well,
you just said they
the
can't
mere
be.
fact that you state that there are happy nihilists doesn't make it true. Like, what's your evidence that, how do you measure nihilism and how have you associated it with happiness? And what's your definition of happiness? And have you compared them to religious people?
How long are they happy for? That's the real question here.
Because if you do, by the way, it's clearly the case that religious people over the long run have better mental health. It's a well-documented fact in psychological literature.
Sure.
So your claim is just a claim. It doesn't stand on anything.
So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned, because it depends on what you mean by happy, and it depends on the duration that you're trying to calculate over. Now and then there's probably some deluded soul who thinks he's a nihilist who's momentarily pleased with himself. But as a long-term strategy to deal with the future, to get along with yourself and with others, it's sadly lacking. That's why Nietzsche warned that when God died, as he announced in 1850, that people would be flooded with pointless, anxiety-ridden, hopeless nihilism. And that was what would attract them to for example, to the false gods of totalitarianism, which is exactly what happened. Because everybody worships something, even atheists who think they don't.
Aren't there unhappy Christians or devoted believers? So worshiping something is neither sufficient nor necessary for happiness then?
Well, terrible things can come your way regardless, and that does happen. But it's the case that even when circumstances become deeply troublesome, that how you're oriented makes a big difference. So I'll give you an example. So the book of Job deals with the issue of unfair suffering. So Job is a good man who has everything taken away from him in the most painful possible way.
To settle a bet, right?
With Satan, yes. And so he makes the axiomatic presumption that he won't lose faith in himself or in the spirit of being itself. And that helps him remain calm and forward-looking through his time of trial.
Doesn't he absolutely curse God?
No. His wife tells him to do that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good. My final claim is that atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories.
Good one.
Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. Trying to go again. Yeah. Guy on top left who's standing with the black sweater. Isn't that the guy from earlier? Why is he running again? There's people who haven't sat down with him yet.
Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story.
It is a deep question and something you should look into if you want to follow Christ and the Bible, but this is a disingenuous portrayal of what it actually says in the book. It's nitpicking certain verses and reading out of context, and it's disingenuous. That's the very issue with this. And if you have a disingenuous way of going into discussion, it's going to be ultimately meaningless. While Jordan Peterson actually wants to have a productive outcome from the discussion, which is why he doesn't mind losing a logical gotcha, because he wants the truth. He wants to convey spirit. He wants to, in some way or another, elevate you or broaden your mind. And this is just, once again, it just seems like disingenuous. I just want to logically be right. I don't know, man.
Christian ethics.
Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library.
And God.
They're all so fucking feminine. I think that's just a natural outcome. If you're not following God, you're going to become weak. Look at today's world. All men worship women. All men are feminine. This is just what happens, I guess.
It doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you is a
Sorry, because it's not to say something's wrong with you if you have feminine temperament. I have feminine qualities to myself, but there's difference between being infantilized and having that. I don't know. There's like a spirit there. You know how gay people they have this quote unquote feminine spirit, but it's not the good feminine. It's the argumentative and prideful kind of feminine. You see that kind of it's like the Jezebels. Yeah, that's Jezebel right there. That's Jezebel. Recognize it. Recognize it.
Damn
Look
baby
at it.
barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all
He
of
has it
this
too.
in line with Christian
He
ethics?
has a little bit more of Delilah, this cute guy over there.
In Numbers and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake, I think. It's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that
no,
if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking
How
about
do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. But sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with?
Well,
that
I just think
question?
that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. That like the Christian
I
God
didn't
isn't
say
like
that.
Christian
I
ethical.
said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure.
Don't get mad though. It's cool. It's cool. But I get it. It must be hard.
So that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go
Thank
through the
you.
example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line
That's a
with
good
Christian
question.
ethics?
That's a good question. I don't
If asked honestly and earnestly, not if it's used as ammunition to bolster your point.
Justification for that? Is that in line?
That is something you should look at if you want to follow Christ, but I question his honesty there.
That's a good
Christian
question.
ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but
And-
this
and-
one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
well-
what differentiates it from anything else is that this one, it's God
Do you
saying,
think that
go
there's
and
ever
do this
such a thing?
atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right, fair
Yeah,
enough.
but
I
this
mean,
one
people,
certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
well, a genocide can be a war, but
Absolutely not.
Look.
The genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? wait a sec. Now redress
So
what
yeah,
I just
yeah.
said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great in all like the
think it's
great
a
making
definition.
qualities.
Sure.
Yeah,
By
like
definition.
flawless. Yeah. So
Okay,
so,
so
does a
wait a
flawless
sec,
thing
wait a
change?
sec.
Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good?
If we were to grow as people and achieve spiritual heights as we progress, and therefore would be held to higher moral standards, then yes, the way you would speak about truth would change, but the truth in of itself wouldn't change. So the same way you have sacrifice in the Old Testament and you have sacrifice in the New Testament, but they're different now, right?
Here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time.
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the
does,
truth. That's one.
that's totally fine, but
No,
presumably
no. You don't get to skate over
because
that
this is a
with
straw man.
that's totally fine.
It's a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In
the
what way?
argument
No,
is
wait,
that God,
wait a sec. You
Well, I'm already
said
waiting a sec.
find one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't say any
just
of
did.
those words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation
rephrase.
you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously, I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly.
Okay.
Okay. Rephrase your question so that, because I must
Sure.
have missed it. I
So-
tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral,
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
our
Precisely what I
understanding
said.
might, but
Okay, how
presumably
do we
what the perfect being is revealing.
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do
So,
we distinguish between whether...
between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself?
Between our
we can only, yeah, well, we can only
Presumably
see
a
through our
perfect
own
being-
lenses.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time
how does
is
something-
revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
And complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
So in
Like,
this
for
case-
example, are you
well, yeah, I
perfect in
blame this-
attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles.
Okay, but now we're shifting the argument. Now it's like, okay, but God could have made it better. God could have made it so that I would be. Foundationally, the argument is, oh, God could have made me believe in Him if He wanted to. Whatever.
Where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand
maintain
like
free will.
thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
Wait
if
a sec. Let's
well,
not go.
Wait, now He's going to deny free will?
But that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
So in
Like,
this
for
case-
example, are you
well, yeah, I
perfect in
blame this-
attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles. Where
He could have created you without free will, but He didn't. And then you're gonna. Now, is it just me? Like,
we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand
maintain
like
free will.
thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible.
didn't you just refute yourself by saying God could have made you in a way so that you would be a blind robot who just believes and follows Him? But now you're gonna claim free will doesn't exist? While you choose to not believe in God? What?
Because
Wait
if
a sec. Let's
well,
not go
wait,
to that
because
yet.
you threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you
I'm
said,
saying
why
that's
wouldn't God?
incoherent.
Well,
It's
a thousand
contradictory.
years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you. But have
and
it your
a
way.
thousand years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened.
If you have no free will, then yes. But this, does make sense. Like you put the, what's the saying? You put the horse before the cart or whatever.
By making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will.
No, knowledge of the future doesn't mean you don't have free will. That's a common theological argument against free will, but that's not actually true. Just because I know what's going to happen doesn't mean it is predestined to happen and it cannot happen any other way, because this is hard to grasp. You can imagine mathematical dimensions here. You can have, so this would be two-dimensional. You have just a piece of paper, a flat surface. You can walk on that surface. But you can't see what's like, you don't have, you just see what's ahead of you and what's to your right, but there's no sense of depth. If I'm outside of it, I can see everywhere where you're going, while you can't perceive me. So if I'm outside of time, I can see outside of time what's gonna happen within time. And just because I know what's gonna happen, because time doesn't exist from the point at which I'm looking at it, from the point at which I'm looking at it, everything has already happened, because I'm the beginning and the end. So just because I know already what's going to happen, which is why, for example, sent down the book of Revelation, doesn't mean everything is predestined. You have free will. And your own experience should tell you that you have free will. To argue against free will is so disconnected with your own very experience. It's almost scary how lost some people get. But yeah, it's difficult to explain, like, from a logical perspective, or we're sort of unable to understand how something outside of time could perceive the end of something without it being predetermined yet. But that's because it transcends time in of itself. The same way, it's impossible for you to imagine the fourth dimension because you're a three-dimensional being. Sure, you could say time is the fourth dimension, but imagine you can look down. You can only look down, so you can see the second dimension. You can see the first dimension, right? You could see the two-dimensional plate, and you could see the thing moving, but the thing couldn't perceive you because you're in height. You transcend its dimensional limitation. Same goes for time.
You believe in an all-good God, or an all-knowing God that made everything?
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then the free will theodicy fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you
you
want to
tried
respond
to
to
make
the argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case.
It's a weak argument, and it's not his own argument either. Just because you know what's going to happen doesn't mean it's predestined and you don't have free will.
For a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Well, it just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, like under
Like
your
I said,
view,
if you want to have it fail, no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue we're
Do you
discussing.
acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world
doesn't mean determined.
It's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make
causally,
it determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
It means it's going to happen, but it doesn't say how it's going to happen. Because it's true in a sense, we have limited free will. For example, I can't float in the sky right now. I can't fly. Does that mean I don't have free will? No, I'm constrained by the boundaries of existence in of itself. Which means, yeah, I don't have free will to fly around like Superman. So in that sense, you could say, yeah, sure, I have limited free will. That's his whole argument. He's like, okay, God constrained us to this planet with these natural laws in place, and therefore we don't have free will because there's limitations. But you don't have limitations down to the core. You have a realm of free will in which you're free to choose whatever you want to do. It's just you're in a limited playground. So yes, from that point you could say we don't have free will, but you still have free will within the system that you're contained in. I can choose to move my hand up and down. I can't choose to fly around, which still means I have free will. But you could call it limited free will, limited by the bounds of the laws of creation or the physicality surrounding you.
Okay.
That's not the case.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to.
It's not. Doesn't have anything to do with the topic, and it's also you're just taking somebody else's argument, and yeah, I don't know. It's just a weak argument. In my biased opinion.
Jordan, nice to meet you.
Very zippy. What's your name?
I'm Liam.
Hi, Liam. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm surrounded by atheists.
My question to you, let me scoot in, would be, What does it mean to accept Christian values precisely, or Christian morality?
It means to aim up as hard as you can, no matter what happens to you.
Okay.
Okay.
He didn't get that.
So I think that that's a very broad definition of what Christian
Yeah, but
morality
it'll come
is.
in handy at some point in your life.
Right. But I think that many different like disciplines and theologies.
Well, you asked for a truncated answer. Eh? I
Right.
mean, there's other ways of representing the
Yeah.
situation, but I wanted to give you something that was kind of foundational briefly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't mean it's, exhaustive.
Yeah.
I could say that you would have to believe that Christ is God and he died for your sins, right? But that's in a very difficult way to understand. That's the same claim.
Yeah. If there are other theologies and disciplines that have similar types of values, how then is that definition mean? Like, wouldn't those also be Christian values under your definition?
That's a good question. I spent a lot of time studying different religious systems from all over the world and found multiple interesting layers of concordance.
Right.
So, for example, in ancient Egypt, their god Horus, who was the reviving god of the totalitarian state, the corrupt he was the god of attention. Right, and the Jews hypothetically came out of Egypt, and there was crosstalk between Egyptian and Jewish foundational morality, and then that bled into Christianity. I mean, human beings all over the world have come up with moral systems that fit roughly into a pattern, and they're very usefully studied. I learned a lot about Christianity by studying Taoism, for example, like a lot. So I think you can make a case that Christianity formalized the landscape of good and evil more comprehensively and in more detail than any other religious system, and I think that that's part of the reason that it defeated paganism and spread so broadly across the West and is still dominant, still understructures our culture, for example.
The way you feel about Horus or Taoism or something is how I feel about Christian morals, I think.
Yeah, but how do I feel about them?
Well, that you took inspiration from them, you learned from them. Maybe
That's a good start, because I would say that actually constitutes belief. Like you said, well, look.
Right.
In Noah, in the story of Noah, right? Noah is inspired by the apprehension that all hell is going to break loose. Okay, he regards that inspiration as God.
Okay.
Right, and when God comes to Abraham, he comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure. It's inspiration. One of the definitions of God in the Old Testament, unsurprisingly, given the derivation of the word, is inspiration. And so if you take inspiration from Christian ideas, then insofar as you do that, you are in fact a believer, which was my point with regards to atheists not understanding.
But have you
what they're
taken
rejecting.
inspiration from Taoism or from studying Egyptian mythology?
Definitely.
So then you believe them under that definition?
Yeah, but I've incorporated them into something I think that's more comprehensive.
Is it possible to take inspiration and to appreciate the teachings without being a believer in their truth claims?
It depends.
Yes, but the thing is, what he's trying to say is that the Christian morality is the underlying basis of morality. While other teachings or ways can have true things, it isn't necessarily the truth. So you could take inspiration from another teaching, but you wouldn't have to if you have the base of Christianity. Then you don't need to take inspiration from another teaching if Christianity is indeed the truth, not just a true thing or a thing containing true things.
No, I don't think so, but I think, you see, there are different kinds of truth claims, right? There's propositional truth claims, which are the truth claims of what you say, and then there's embodied truth claims, which is the truth claims of what you do. That should be prioritized. Optimally, what you say and what you do would be brought into harmony. But I would say if you had to prioritize, it should be what you attend to and what you act first. And that's what Christ actually says in the Gospels, because he points to the Pharisees, for example, who say all the right things, but don't do any of the right things, and points out very clearly that that's not acceptable.
I don't know that the Christian morality, those principles originate in Christianity, because you brought up other things that predate Christianity that you can.
Yeah, because we were made in the image before Christ came to redeem the world, which means we're gonna get some things right.
very closely tied connections too.
Well, I don't think they do originate precisely. I mean,
Right.
I don't think the Christian claim is exactly that they originate Christianity.
So if I'm
right?
living those values, how is it that I'm living the Christian values and maybe not the Egyptian values or something else that you brought up?
Pause there. You've been voted out by
That
the
was
majority.
good. That was good. Yeah.
Because if the Spirit of God is one with the Spirit of Christ, and you align yourself with that Spirit independently of Christ, or what you think to be independently of Christ, you are still aligning yourself with Christianity to the degree that you align yourself with the Spirit that dwells within you, and therefore with Christ. If Christ is the truth, and His Spirit is the very thing inside of man that makes him made in the image of God, and guides you towards truth, even if you're not necessarily following a religion or aren't born in the time of Christ or Christianity.
Hi.
Hello there.
Is the rat still
How are you
running?
doing?
I'm good. How
Give
are
others
you?
a chance,
What's your
man.
name?
I'm Kumari. So I was curious about this like Christian morality that you're talking about, because a lot of my issues with Christianity have to do with the base morality of it, specifically with like the idea of like the rapture and how we see people that aren't going to come up with us with the rapture, and that concept of heaven and hell. I don't really agree with that morality, but if you could explain that to me and how I do agree with that, I would love to like hear.
Well,
your
I
opinions.
can't explain the rapture to you because that isn't something I concern myself with, and that's more of a
That's true.
sectarian belief than something that's central to Christianity. Now, there's all sorts of evangelical Protestants who might disagree with that, but
Yeah.
that doesn't have anything to do with me.
Is she sick or is that makeup?
Protestants who might disagree with that, but
Yeah.
that doesn't have anything to do with me. You asked a deeper question with regard to, let's say, heaven and hell and judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, sin, you could put it this way, sin is what puts you in hell, right? And so then you might ask, well, how do you know you're in hell? How about you do anything to get out of it?
Can I ask you
How
a
about
question?
you know that you put yourself there?
Do you think is sin like a part of Christian morality?
What do
to
you mean exactly? Sin as
Like
a part.
the
It's missing
concept
the
of sin?
Okay,
Yeah.
it's derived from an archery term, and it means to miss the target, right? And so it presumes that there's such a thing as a central target, and that you can miss it in many ways. And the consequence of that will be your life will be ridden with anxiety. Your life will be pointless.
And what
People
if
will
I,
turn
like,
against
don't
you.
believe in sin at all?
Well, do you believe in error?
I
It
don't.
doesn't matter, you'll still face the consequences. That's, truth defends itself. You can defend truth as much as you want. Ultimately, truth is going to speak for itself. If you want to be in ignorance, you can be in ignorance. But you're going to face the consequences of your actions. If you're a believer or if you're not a believer, nobody's exempt.
Any mistakes?
What if I believe that the mistakes that you make, that they're fixable, and so that no sin is finite, and that the
Well,
idea
that's a Christian belief.
of the idea of hell, I don't believe
No, it's
in
also
it
a
because
Christian belief, by the way.
a Christian belief is hell.
No, that there's no sin that, well, there's one. The sin against the Holy Ghost is unforgivable, but that's really the sin against the process that would enable you to learn.
Okay. But is the
That's very interesting. Think about that for a second. The only sin which is unforgivable is the sin which would prevent you from engaging with the process which would actually bring upon a better future for yourself. So the only thing which prevents you from going to heaven is ignoring the way to go to heaven, is refusing to walk to heaven. This is once again, it's not like the entity out there is gonna come and drop you off in hell. Like, you walk there by yourself. It's the the gates of hell are not locked from the outside, they're locked from the inside. It would be the ultimate manifestation of your lower self, your lower will, which perpetually wants to oppose God and choose himself, even if it comes at the detriment of your own self. So for example, God would come and offer you heaven, and he would say, okay, stop taking drugs, stop sleeping with a lot of girls, but you would cling to that over his command, and you would stay in hell, continuously enforcing the very thing which causes you suffering, because you're deceived by the spiritual enemy who poses as the way out and that which is good, even though it drags you deeper and deeper into hell. And eternal hell is just the ultimate manifestation of your own lower will manifested, because you have two sides within you. This is the biblical battle of spirit and flesh. You can have a girlfriend, And then there's another girl who wants to sleep with you, and she's really attractive. And because you're a man, because of a biology, part of you is going to be tempted. This is going to be your lower self. Part of you is going to be like, no, I have a commitment. I need to do what is right. That's your higher self. These two are competing with one another right now within you. That's the spiritual war. That's the internal battle. This is why you have pain and pleasure, because you're in the middle between heaven and hell. And if one wins over the other, then God is going to be like, all right, I will withdraw my spirit from you. And then all you're going to be left is with that lower nature. And that lower nature will never, ever, ever look at the very process necessary or have the introspection and humility to look at one's own decisions, to correct oneself, and then act more in accordance with heaven. Because this is a deep theological question, but and here's what's actually interesting. People say in heaven you can't sin, which is only partially true. It is technically, logically conceivable how you can sin in heaven. I can have here an eternal body and I can beat the fuck out of you with my fist. But I will, because I'm perfect, because I'm one with Christ, I will never ever even begin to conceive of such a disgusting thought. So it will never even cross my mind for a single second. And so this activity cannot exist in heaven. So in that sense, sin will never ever be in heaven because we're perfect, we're harmonious. And in that same way, you will never ever escape hell because there's no spirit within you. You're just a pure manifestation of your own egoic will. And so there's never going to be a single second or single inch of submission or humility or allowing correction. So it's the ultimate manifestation of the rebellion against the order, which brings about that which is good. So because people always say, oh, okay, so if I do sin, I go to heaven. They think of it as they have this naive view that, oh, the guy's gonna come and then he's gonna throw you into hell because you followed the wrong rules set or you said the wrong things. It's like no, it's deeper than that. It works if you live it out. You're gonna feel it on heaven already. Sorry, you're gonna feel it on earth already. Like I've been a drug addict. I've indulged in heathenism. I followed the world. It led me to depression. Then I changed my ways. Now I gave up all of these things. I don't have social media. I don't have friends with benefits anymore. I don't masturbate. I don't take drugs. I don't smoke, and I'm much more fulfilled because I let go of the things that I thought were fulfilling me. I humbled myself and I allowed correction, and therefore I was allowed to walk towards heaven, towards a better place, which is why I want to elevate others, because that's what you do when you truly find goodness. And so it's not that he just throws you into hell, it's much, much deeper than that. But yeah, it takes a while to figure that out. But that's sort of the goal of life as well. You find out which side you want to walk to, because that's also what I mentioned earlier. If you're fragmented, you're most likely just walking towards your own immediate, narrowly self-focused will at the moment, which is going to lead you to closer to closing the gates of hell from the inside. It's like you're going away and closing it rather than humbling yourself and then stumbling into the light, stumbling uphill, so to speak. Because Christ says, my burden is light, because once again, you will suffer, but it's about choosing your suffering. And if you choose to suffer for righteousness, you're going to get to a better place the more you suffer. That's why his burden is light. You're going to carry a burden, but the best burden to carry is the one which brings you uphill, not the one that brings you further down than you were before.
That's really the sin against the process that would enable you to learn.
Okay.
That's very profound.
But there's a Christian belief that hell does exist, and if I commit sin, I'm going to go there, correct?
Yes.
So what if I don't? I don't believe in that. Like I think that when you
truth will defend itself. You will be depressed. You will metaphorically already feel hell if you forego the truth and you indulge in sin. Anybody with personal experience and some introspection and humility will attest to that. The drugs make you depressed. All the things that the world reveres and runs after, if that's all you run after, you're going to be depressed.
a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. I think that when you commit sin, that it's because of a lot of environmental factors in your life, like where you were born and who you were raised
Now we're adverting responsibility. Sure.
by. And so there are certain things that lead you down a dangerous path. And once you are dead, I think you're kind of removed of that person. There's no there are no factors of the earth that have to.
What happens after death.
Right.
So I would ask you, in these times that you've suffered terribly in ways that you thought would never end, do you believe that you had any causal role in that? Like, did you play a part in that?
In my own suffering?
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes I would say that there was a part that I played in that.
Okay,
but
that's the thing to find out.
I think that maybe it's like a concept of.
And you should look at that and stop being a quote unquote slave. Because if you keep telling yourself that you're a victim of your circumstances, you're falling into the very sin which Lucifer fell into, which is pride, which is the very thing which is going to prevent you from actually following the very mechanism that's going to allow for a better future to come, which is that's a blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. If you have so much pride and you advert all responsibility or even the possibility that you yourself maybe contribute to your own suffering, then you're never going to escape it. You're going to forego the process in of itself, which would bring about a better future. But she says partially, so she's good.
Free will that I don't really believe, and somewhat of free will that I maybe sometimes I would say that
Okay.
there was a part that I played
well,
in
that's
that.
okay.
But I
That's
also
the thing
do
to
think
find
that
out.
And that's what you should look at, the part that which you can control. And these actions are the ones which you should change, and then your life's gonna get better. That's just how it works, man.
I think that maybe it's like a concept of free will that I don't really believe, and somewhat of free will that I think that there are certain things in your life that lead you to do certain behaviors, and so
Why do they all want to go against free will? Do they actually have a deep theological conundrum within themselves, and after pondering for a while, they came to the realization that they don't have free will, even though their own experience blatantly tells them they have free will? Or do they just want to avert responsibility and dwell more in ignorance because they fail to realize that if you were to actually align yourself with God, your life would be better because they're deceived by the spiritual enemy? I don't know. I'm just saying.
that I think that there are certain things in your life that lead you to do certain behaviors, and so when you commit those sins, you go to hell. I'm not too sure why you would still be reaping the consequences of that.
Like I said, I can't address that. Do you believe that you can change?
I do.
Do you believe you can change for the better?
I do.
Do you believe that when you change for the better, you abandon the things you've done in the past that weren't good?
I think that you can.
Okay, then that's very much in keeping with Christian doctrine.
Can you explain to me how that's in keeping with Christian
Well,
doctrine?
you believe
if you would go to hell for
okay,
those things?
You believe you can improve,
Yeah.
right? And you believe that if you improved, you would let go of things that were impeding you. That's a sacrifice. You believe that improvement would be upward, and you believe that you have agency in that. Yeah, those are all Christian presuppositions.
I guess maybe we have different opinions of what Christian morality is.
Yes, sounds
so
like
I think
it.
that
Yeah, you don't know God, that's why you reject Him.
my opinion of Christian morality is something that I don't really agree with, and maybe you would define that as like the foundations of Christianity.
let me give you an example. So if you want to atone, which means to unify yourself and unify that with the world, then the first thing you have to do is figure out what you did wrong and admit it. That's a confession. That was good.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
That's the humility which allows for the Spirit to come upon you and to correct you. A wise man accepts correction. Oh, we have open debate.
I picked Zena because I think she asked genuine questions and wasn't trying to win.
Okay, well, hello again.
Hi there.
My claim is Jordan Peterson's framework for understanding Christianity is probably not the one that the Bible intended us to use. In regards to the way that you interpret the Bible, I don't see, you have said in some circumstances that there's not a way to kind of say whether or not ontologically the historical claims made by the Bible are true. Like, for example, the story of Cain and Abel. You've said that this story is like a meta-truth in the sense that it exists all throughout time, culturally. And the way that you define meta-truth, I don't see a distinction between that and like a metaphor, right? But and you also said that you cannot say whether this story was true. You can say that it exists eternally, metaphorically, but you can't say that it's true. And if you can't say that there are historical facts being said in the Bible as stories that weren't really said with much ambiguity, how can we say that we can understand the Bible in the way that it's meant to be interpreted? Like, if you cannot make any claims about these stories, right? You don't know whether they're true or false. How do you know that your interpretation is the correct way?
So he does deviate from the sort of mainstream religious interpretations of the Bible, which are often very literal, very concerned with what actually physically took place in history. But this is like, it's about what it's conveying. It's about the underlying message. And so if the underlying message or the principle which a story is conveying is true and applicable in your life and everybody else's life, it doesn't actually matter if the event took place in history. It's still true. You understand? Because it's deeper than just, oh, this happened and this guy came. So if you say these words, you're going to be safe. That's such a limited view of what it is. But yeah, let's see what he answers here. Good
These
question.
stories, right? You don't know they're true or false. How do you know that your interpretation is the correct way?
See, that's why I picked you. You ask intelligent.
Because it's a rifle. It's a deep question. How do you know that the way you interpret the Bible is correct? How do you know that how most people interpret the Bible is correct? How do you know if you follow the guy with a lot of subscribers that he interprets the Bible better than the guy who only has 50? Because more people agree with him. But we're in the world, we're in a fallen state. Most people agree with the worship of celebrities. So could you actually say that the more people agree with you, the less likely you are to be right? Could this be a possibility? Like, how do you actually get to properly interpreting the Bible? And here my answer would be, to the degree that you humble yourself is going to be the degree to which truth is going to be revealed to you, in direct proportion to the degree that you deny yourself and you humble yourself is the degree to which spirit can show you the truth. And this is something that everybody has to do for themselves. And that's also why I'm not a too big fan of religion. Why would you have somebody else interpret the Bible for you? If you have the Spirit, if you're made in the image, then truly humble yourself and truly seek and read the pages. It's gonna come at you. It's gonna awaken that which is within you.
How do you know that your interpretation is the correct way?
Great question.
See, that's why I picked you. You ask intelligent questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. What do they say? By their fruits you'll know them.
Okay.
Right. Well, so one of the things I look at is the impact of what I'm doing. Right. And so I know a lot of evangelical Christians, a lot of Catholics, a lot of Orthodox Christians, a lot of people from other faiths. And they've told me, like many of them, that they found my interpretations very helpful and that it deepened their faith. And so that's interesting because
So do I. I've read all his books, or the last 3 recent ones, 12 Rules, 12 More Rules, and We Who Wrestle with God. I've read them all and I find them incredible in helping one to understand the Bible, because it focuses on what the story is actually conveying rather than memorize what has happened. It's sort of like, to me, this is also a little bit of a naive view or oversimplification, but to me, a lot of modern religion is sort of like history was in school. Just learn the date and learn the number and say the things, spit it out at the test, and you're good. You haven't actually learned or deeply thought about what led to the events in history. It's sort of it's a carnal version.
found my interpretations
People are
very
carnal.
helpful and that it deepened their faith. And so that's interesting because I wouldn't have necessarily expected that to be the case. And I've also talked to thousands of people who've told me that they came to understand the foundational stories of their culture better as a consequence of listening to me, and that they did everything they could to sort out their lives and that it worked. That's
So did I.
many different pieces of evidence that all converge on something like the practical and conceptual utility of my approach. Now, is it the same? There is a lot of approaches to biblical interpretation historically, and what I'm doing is possibly less new than you think.
Yeah, I want to make a claim on whether this evidence is enough, right, to substantiate whether or not your interpretation is going to, be more plausible, right, be the most plausible. Because in regards
It's an open question.
Yeah, right.
You bet.
So in regards to how we interpret the Bible and how we see the Bible, something can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can connect you to your conception of what your faith is. But if it's the quote-unquote interpretation that God does not intend, that can lead to a plethora.
That's certainly the case.
Well, but the thing is, if your interpretation works and it brings fruits in your life, and if that is actually the case, then that means you've correctly interpreted it. Or you are deceived in the sense that you think it improved your life when it really actually didn't. And the question is, well, how do you know it actually did improve my life? How do I know I'm not just deceived, right? Because you can think, if I sexually indulge, if I download Tinder right now and I match with a girl and then I say the right words, I play a stupid game and then I get to sleep with her, it feels like, oh, my life's better now, but really it's gotten worse. So, but here's the same thing again. Truth will speak for itself. You don't have to convince anybody of truth. It's gonna speak for itself. So it's like the love of God. You can't explain it, but you'll know when you feel it. And so Yeah, I can't articulate that. I want to see what he says. I'll be quiet.
Connect you to your conception of what your faith is. But if it's the quote unquote interpretation that God does not intend, that can lead to a plethora.
That's certainly the case. That's why the medieval Christians were so concerned about heresy.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they felt, and that's why the Catholics objected so much to the Protestant Reformation, because they believed that the fractionation of Christianity would result in an indefinite fractionation, right? Well, and that's exactly what's happened.
Right.
So yeah, that's definitely a problem. I think one of the foundational principles, for example, there's a foundational principle in the Old Testament of hospitality, right? So what you want to do if you set up your local environment properly is to make it welcoming to people voluntarily. And so one of the ways you could judge the validity of the interpretation of a classic story is whether or not that interpretation might be regarded by someone as welcoming. Does that represent something you'd actually like to have if you were acting in your own interest in the long run?
Right, and we can talk about that. Like do
protect you from fear might be another one.
Exactly. So we can talk about like how these interpretations of the Bible, like if they kind of resonate with us. And I think, but I do, and I think that can in some case be some kind of like evidence, oh, this might be true, but I think we need to ask, is evidence damning, right? Is this evidence certain, right? Yeah. So, but I do want to look at, again, the consequences and our understanding of this interpretation once more. So we look at, again, the story of Cain and Abel, and we say, yeah, so I believe this is a meta-truth. I believe that this story is resonant throughout cultures. That is all true and dandy, and I'm sure that is some, in some way, the story was put in here for the reason, right? To tell us about, fights between brothers. But also, you can't say I do know or I don't know that this story is false or true in an ontological, historical sense, as a historical fact. Were there two people like that were specifically referenced?
Okay, I don't think that's knowable, but I'm not sure why it matters to you.
So the reason why it matters to me is because we need to know how we should interpret the things that the Bible says, and the things,
many ways.
Right. But like, if we interpret
sometimes poetry, sometimes history, sometimes fact,
but for
sometimes
example,
metaphor.
The reason why it's important,
Sometimes
right,
all
very
of them.
important, is because, for example, we can talk about something like God says, I believe it's like 1 Corinthians 15:17, something about how belief in God specifically as someone who resurrected or as someone who died for our sins is important, right? But we have to look at, if we can interpret that as just like, you have to believe that God is a symbol of sacrifice. That is different from believing that there was an actual person named Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our sins.
True.
So if you believe one and not the other, that can be the difference between you going to hell and you going to heaven. So if we cannot make, like, we cannot say that we know whether or not certain historical facts in the Bible happen, like even as just like events, like because the events matter, because again, God dying for our sins on the cross was an event. If we can't say that we know these things happened, these things did or didn't happen, this then leads us to kind of like the conundrum of how do we know what we are meant to believe, what the Bible intended for us to believe, and this can be very, very important to like our fate.
Great question.
You see what I'm saying?
Wow.
I've got no disagreement with any of that. What sort of response do you want from that?
So
you pushed me beyond the limits of my knowledge.
Really?
Well,
I think
there's so many things you can't know. I'm struggling. I know that the biblical stories are the foundation of Western culture. I know that the consequence of those stories has been the genesis of a society that is in the main freer and more abundant than any societies have ever been. I don't exactly understand the relationship between those stories and that outcome, but it's not nothing.
Right.
But I don't know the answer to the questions that you're asking. It's the case that forever when people have been interpreting religious stories, they wrestled with exactly the question that you just described. When is it fact? When is it poetry? When is it music? When is it metaphor? When is it ritual? When is it time-bound?
But what I'm saying is that your interpretation of the Bible, if you cannot tell us, again, if these historical events happened or not, that can be the deciding factor in if someone is like damned to hell for.
This is interesting because she's talking about something which a lot of people actually criticize Jordan Peterson for, an emphasis on the meaning rather than what it's directly saying, like believe in Christ and his resurrection, believe he's the Son of God. And then he's like, okay, well, what does belief mean? But to a lot of people, it's just, okay, I believe this guy resurrected, and a lot of people criticize him for not speaking on that or ignoring that aspect, but I think he does it deliberately because he doesn't want to be put in that box, or he doesn't want to. It's hard to formulate, but I get both sides. You know, Wes Hoff said something similar once. He said that Jordan Peterson is so concerned with abstract meanings that he forgets the very central claim: believe in the Son of Man and you shall be saved. But then once again, he is going to say, well, okay, but let's look at what does believe actually mean. And he's right in saying that this is not just some saying he says to avoid the question, like, what does it actually mean to believe? You know, it is really difficult to put into terms or like accurately quantify how it's hard. Like, how do you know the way you read or interpret the Bible is correct? How do you know? Like, ask yourself this: how do you actually know? How do you know that the pastor you follow with millions of subscribers is actually telling you the truth? By what measure can you accurately determine how you interpret the Bible to be truthful? It's you can know, but it's like I think it goes beyond words. It's like spirit is spiritual. You feel the love when you do truly get connected, when you can see your own ignorance and mistakes and you grow out of them, and you can recognize the ignorance and mistakes in others, and you can see how you yourself thought you weren't ignorant while you were ignorant, but now you've grown out of that. But the problem is you only ever see what you've already done. Same as dimensions, which I've mentioned earlier, you only ever see what's beneath you rather than what is above you. And so we always have this trap of spiritual ego. So the most important thing is, once again, what I've alluded to earlier: submission, humility, continuous renewing submission. Don't think, oh, I've got it figured out now. Now I got it. Now I've been in religious class for 5 years. Now I got it. Now I'm going to trump all these false interpretations. No, keep humbling yourself and submitting and decreasing. Because if you're this little speck and this whole screen is all the knowledge, just because you increase that little speck a bit more doesn't mean you're not still nothing in the bigger picture. And so if you increase your pride because all you see is your own increase in knowledge, then you're going to prevent yourself from growing even more and getting closer to the bigger picture. So the way to know if how you interpret the Bible is true is exactly to the degree to which you genuinely humble yourself and seek in submission to decrease. We must decrease so he can increase. This is what Paul wrote to the Corinthians, if I'm not mistaken. So it's super deep question, man.
When is it metaphor? When is it ritual? When is it time bound?
But what I'm saying is that your interpretation of the Bible, if you cannot tell us, again, if these historical events happened or not, that can be deciding factor in if someone is like damned to hell for eternity or if they go to heaven, right? So that's why
I don't concern myself so much with that particular question. You know, like that would be something that would stem more from an evangelical viewpoint. And I'm not putting that down, by the way. You're asking me a question I really can't answer.
Okay.
I'm not claiming even that my interpretations are canonically correct. I can only tell you the consequences of having released them into the world, let's say.
Right. So I guess we've kind of come to a conclusion about that, which I've kind of...
Very honest answer by him. Like, that's something I like about him, and that also shows his sincerity. He's not here to win. He has no problem admitting if he doesn't know something, and that speaks to his credibility.
Into the world, let's say.
Right. So I guess we've kind of come to a conclusion about that, which I've kind of wrestled with your framework and pushed it kind of to its end, at least in the way that you can answer my question. So I don't...
Like, she's gonna come to God sooner or later. Because what's his book called? We Who Wrestle with God. Just keep wrestling, girl. You're gonna make it.
Kind of to its end, at least in the way that you can answer my question. So I don't know that we can more wrestle with that.
See, I guess the problem is, you see, I don't exactly understand, I don't think anybody does, the relationship between fact and destiny. Okay. You know, well, they're different realms in a way, because knowing what the world is made of doesn't help you navigate through it, not really. It doesn't provide you with a foundation for navigation. But knowing the facts of the world is obviously useful. And the relationship between those two things, part of that's the mystery of Western civilization and the continued competition between science and religion.
To bridge this kind of understanding between fact and destiny is like an important question that the burden is on Christianity to answer, and specifically interpretations of Christianity. And if we can't do that...
Why is the burden on Christianity?
Because it posits, right, that this interpretation, right, is going to be a way to understand God. But if it's faulty, right, that can
What evidence would you accept?
That would be an interesting question, because I've seen people try to answer the question, and I've never really been moved, because I can always attack and then kind of get to this point where the answer is I don't know.
Well, here's an answer.
Let's pause there. I'm sorry, that's time.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the ride.
Well, I definitely picked the right person.
Thank you.
That was very good.
Thank you
Really,
so much.
very good. I don't like talking to win, but there were portions of all the conversations that were truly productive, and that it's instructive for people to see the distinction between a debate that's aimed at local victory and dominance, let's say, even of ideas, and a discussion that's predicated on mutual exploration and establishment of like a harmonious understanding and peace.
Exactly what I said. Some people have their own agendas, some people want to take others down and win through defeating the other person, and some person don't mind admitting they're wrong and humbling themselves in order to potentially lift somebody else up, even if it comes at the detriment of their own social status in a certain group setting at the very moment. Voluntary self-sacrifice. You don't mind being laughed at by ignorant people because maybe you're going to be able to wake some or just one of them up by God's grace.
Jordan Peterson, out of all of the kind of theists that are on the internet, he is one of the better ones in regards to just like being genuine as a person. But I do feel like he does a lot of, I guess, wordplay, and that can make it a little bit difficult and kind of just muddies the waters in regard to what we define as Christianity and atheism.
Jordan Peterson, I credit to turning me into an atheist. I had a blast talking to him today. I think if the average person followed what Jordan Peterson said, they'd realize that fundamentally Jordan Peterson is not a Christian, in fact, uses many atheistic principles, and operated under bad faith by seeming to forget what basic words meant when he didn't want to answer a question.
His definitions can kind of shift a little bit depending on the moment, and I think that he wasn't afraid to flex that definitional muscle.
And I felt really good about our conversation. I thought that it highlighted some key issues in Jordan Peterson's theology. I hope he reflects on these issues and maybe deepens his perspective on them in the future.
With Zena, she was able to build up such a rapport that he chose her in the end, and they were able to have an extended dialogue, which is something I had hoped for. So maybe I learned a little something from Zena about being more cordial.
It's extraordinarily useful to be able to model productive debate and conversation for people and see how my thoughts were landing with people who are particularly skeptical, and to put that in front of a large audience and to assess the consequences.
So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I wanted to react to this. I just felt like it. If you watched it this far, give me a like. Thank you for watching, and yeah, let me know if you want more reactions, if you actually enjoy my reactions, if you actually feel like I'm genuinely adding something to the video, because yeah, I want to do this. I want to react. I enjoy reacting. I enjoy putting my thoughts out there. And if there's somebody who appreciates them, then hey, that's pretty cool. So thank you for being here.